Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. And today we're going to be talking about one of the most important books that has ever been written, one that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the Histories by Herodotus. Written almost 2,500 years ago, or I should say approximately 2,500 years ago. It is Herodotus's near first-person account of one of the most important historical events in the history of Western civilization, and that is the Persian Wars. And for his work here on this book, The Histories, Herodotus is known as the father of history. But he's also known by another epithet, and that epithet is the father of lies. And if you go out onto YouTube and you do a search for Herodotus and the Histories, you will find YouTube videos that call Herodotus a malicious liar. And Amazon itself, where it's promoting and selling publications of this book, on one of the Amazon pages selling Herodotus the Histories, and the description for that book, the Amazon description reads, and I quote, "Where the facts stopped, Herodotus just kept on going." So is Herodotus the father of history, or is he the father of lies, as so many people here in the modern era seem to try to implicate or just directly accuse him of? We're going to answer that question here today on the channel. We're going to tackle that question head on, and I'm going to give you my opinion on whether or not he is the father of history or is he the father of lies. But before we can do that, before we can have an intelligent conversation on that aspect of Herodotus and this seminal book here, we need to go into who Herodotus was, why this book was important, how the book is written, how it's laid out, and where the information sources that Herodotus put into it came from, and give you that background. And once we have that background set up, then we can address that question, and we will address that question. So I'm going to set this book down there. It's a Viking Press edition here from 2013 with a new translation by Tom Holland. It is a library version. I will get to this version here and several other editions of Herodotus the Histories and talk about different editions that are available. But I need to set that thing down because it's an absolute doorstop and it's getting my shoulder. But Herodotus, who was Herodotus? Herodotus was a Greek. He was a Greek who was born in approximately 480 BC. Nobody knows exactly the date that he was born. You'll see exact dates, they're just guessing, but it's around 480 BC, and he was born in the city of Halicarnassus, which was located in the kingdom of Caria. And Caria was located on Asia Minor, because at this time in history, back in 480 BC, the Ionian mainland and the Carian mainland, which is Asia Minor at this point, the coast of Asia Minor, which roughly correlates to modern-day Turkey, was heavily Greek. The Greeks had colonized large portions of this coastline of Asia Minor, and it was very Greek-centric, and it was a heavily Greek culture at that point in time, outside of the Greek mainland and the Peloponnese. So Herodotus is born into Halicarnassus, and from Halicarnassus, he travels widely around the ancient world. From Halicarnassus, he goes to Athens, he goes to Italy, he goes to Samos, he travels all the way up into the Black Sea, he travels through the Persian Empire, and he travels, rather importantly, in Egypt as well. He was very well traveled, and during these travels, he met with and he spoke with numerous people from all these countries and cultures, and recorded all of that, all those interactions here in this book. So that's a little bit of the background of Herodotus. But what did Herodotus do? What was his background as a person? What was his profession? Nobody knows. They have no idea who he was as a professional person. He gives you no clue in the book, and no other source tells you what he was. He could have been a merchant, a trader who had his own cargo ship, and he was traveling in his cargo ship around these areas, and that's how he gained access to all of them. He could have been a rich nobleman who was just traveling on his treasury, his personal bank account, or a warrior who was traveling through these areas. We just don't know. But whatever he was, he had to have been a very important person. And I say that, and the reason I say that is because to every one of these countries, every one of these different cultures that he went to, he was given access to the highest levels of the priesthoods within those nations, within those cultures, such as Egypt and Persia, and on Athens and the other areas. And he talked to these high-level priests, and these priests invariably gave him access into their temples, and not just into the temples, but back into the inner sanctums of those temples, where he describes the inner sanctums and a lot of their traditions that go on in those temples. Although a lot of times when he's talking about these religious activities that go on in the temples, he refuses to describe them because he does not want to affront the gods. But he's there, and he's there in the inner sanctums and observing these religious rites. And not just anybody could walk in off of the street and go back into the inner sanctum of these temples. You had to be a fairly important personage in order to be granted that privilege. And for that reason, I put forward that Herodotus was in fact a fairly important person, whoever he was, traveling around the ancient world. So that's Herodotus. What are the histories? What is this book? How is it laid out? What does it cover? This book is laid out in 9 books. I guess I should say this tome of this collection is a collection of 9 books by Herodotus that, for the most part, document the Persian War in chronological order, starting with what he believes, Herodotus that is the incident that kicked off the animosity between the Greeks in mainland Greece and the Peloponnese, and the non-Greek people in Asia Minor. And that event was the kidnapping of Helen of Troy. And we'll talk more about that later. But it starts with that, and then it moves on to Croesus. Croesus was the king of Lydia. This was a Greek kingdom in Asia Minor. It was the greatest Greek kingdom in Asia Minor. And Croesus was the richest man in the entire ancient world. There's a saying, as rich as Croesus. That's how rich he was. He lived and ruled his kingdom of Lydia from the city of Sardis. And famously, Croesus starts the Persian Wars. He starts the Persian Wars when he goes to the oracle at Delphi, the most important oracle in the entire ancient world, and he consults the oracle and asks the oracle, should I attack this new upstart empire that is forming to the east of me, that is known as the Persian Empire, being led by Cyrus? And the oracle famously replies back to him, if you attack, a great empire will be destroyed. Croesus takes this as just wonderful news, indicating that he will be victorious. He launches his attack upon the Persian Empire, and he is utterly destroyed, defeated, and he is captured by Cyrus. Cyrus doesn't kill him. Cyrus keeps him as a valued and trusted advisor for the rest of his days. But Croesus famously misinterpreted the prophecy by the oracle at Delphi. It's a very famous story. From there, you go into the Ionian revolts, because Persia at this point takes over all of mainland Asia Minor Greece. But then you have these Ionian revolts between the Greeks and the Persians, which then lead to the attacks by the Persians, first by Darius and then by Xerxes. And Herodotus chronicles that pretty much in chronological order, all of those events, including the major battles of the Persian Wars, which is the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Salamis, and the Battle of Plataea. Now, also during this epic tale, this epic saga, this historical chronicle that Herodotus puts together for us, he frequently goes off and digresses. He has these lengthy diversions and digressions where he is talking about a certain culture. He's giving you the background of this culture, the Medes, the Persians, the Scythians, and the Egyptians, and he will go on lengthy digressions where he will give you the cultural history of those people. It turns into a bit of a travelogue. It turns into a bit of an ethnographic study of all these different peoples of the ancient worlds. And so you have these tangents that break from the main story of the Persian Wars, but they're fantastic because, again, it is just giving you a first-hand account by Herodotus when he's in these cultures interacting with these people, and he's giving you all of their myths, their legends, their tall tales, and he's feeding you this information directly and recording it in a very readable, very straightforward and direct manner that's easy and enjoyable to read, that's 2,500 years old. He is essentially giving you a time machine back into the ancient world. And that is the Histories by Herodotus. And I think that gives you a little bit of a glimpse into why it's so important. It's important because Herodotus lived during this period. He lived through a portion of the Persian Wars. And although he wasn't a direct actor in those wars, he had direct access to people who knew the people who were making the decisions. And he gives you the mindsets, the motivations, the machinations, and the ambitions of all of these ancient rulers who are ruling these empires, and these kings and these polemarchs who are leading the Greek armies, as to why they made the decisions that they did, all the interplay, the ambitions and the rivalries and the treachery that was going on in the ancient world that formed and shaped these ancient battles that we would not have if it was not for Herodotus relating all of this information here in this book and giving you a near firsthand account of what is one of the most important historical events in the history of the Western world, and that is the Persian Wars. Because if the Persian Wars had gone in a different direction, had the Medes and the Persians defeated the Greeks, we would be living in a very different world from the one in which we live here today. So that's why this book is so important. It is very readable. Herodotus writes in a very direct and easy to read language. So why is he called the father of lies? What is it that leads people to call him a malicious liar? To put into the description on the Amazon page where the facts stopped, he just kept on going. And that is because there are passages in here, particularly when he's talking about in his travelogue episodes about the ancient cultures and their formations that are clearly false. Such as he's describing the country of Arabia, that there are gold dust mines. There are mounds of gold that come up out of the earth that are there from ants. And these are giant ants. These are giant ants the size of small dogs that are killer ants. And how these Arabians go out and harvest this gold dust and how they get it and how they have to avoid these killer ants. That also in Arabia that there are vast swarms of vipers that have wings and they fly about in these flocks of winged vipers. And there are also multiple stories in here where he's telling you the events that are happening. He's relating these events, but he's relating multiple versions of these events, or in some cases, the years that he's giving for them are off slightly. And those are the chapters and passages located here within the Histories that give him that reputation as being the father of lies, of being a malicious liar. And I'm going to tell you directly, I won't beat around the bush. We're going to cut straight to the chase. They're wrong. It's not him lying. There is a vast difference between relating information that's inaccurate and knowingly telling a lie. A lie is where you are knowingly relating false information, and that is not what Herodotus is doing. In fact, Herodotus is not giving you his opinions. What he is doing is he's citing sources on all of these pieces of information he's getting. These tales of what's going on in Arabia with the giant ants are coming from, for example, the priests at the Temple of Ishtar in Memphis in Egypt. And he gives you the background. He gives you the sources for all of the tales, for all the motivations of all of these ancient leaders, Xerxes, Darius, also known as Darius, for Menelaus, for all of the Greek commanders here involved in the wars. He's telling you who he's getting these sources from. And sometimes he's getting the same story from multiple sources, so he's getting multiple versions of it. And frequently, as he's telling you these different sources' tales, he will often tell you straight up, I don't believe this source, and I don't believe this source for this reason. And that is why he, in fact, is not the father of lies. He footnotes everything. This isn't him relating this. This is him relating what has been told to him. And even where it's inaccurate, even where people are talking about these ants the size of small dogs and the flying vipers, it's still important and it's still relevant because these are, in fact, the myths and legends and tall tales that the people at this time believed. These are tales that they're relating directly to Herodotus at that time, and you're getting inside of the minds of these people and talking about their myths and their legends, and you're knowing what they're talking about on the streets and what they're saying about their neighbors, and it gives you a feel for their culture, and it puts you in their sandals, and it acts as this ancient time machine to transport you back 2,500 years. And it's why this book is so remarkable. You wouldn't have these motivations. You wouldn't know these ambitions that were driving these leaders here back in the ancient world in order to commit these treacheries. And there are numerous treacheries in here and acts of horrific torture and maiming that go on in here, acts of evil that were just stunning. And some of them have to be real, even if they are tall tales. There's too many tales of the same thing happening for it not to have occurred. I think George R.R. Martin, when he was writing A Song of Fire and Ice, drew heavily upon the events that were related by Herodotus, such as tyrants who have complete authority over life and death of everybody underneath them, with no checks and balances, would frequently kidnap the sons of somebody who had offended them, have the son killed, and then invite the father to a banquet, and then serve the son to the father as dinner during the banquet. I think there's at least 3 or 4 times that occurs here within the pages of the Histories by Herodotus. But I digress. So that is why people refer to him as the father of lies, because you have these multiple stories. You have stories where the years are off a little bit, but you've got to remember there's no internet back in the year 450 BC. There's no library down the street with a nice chronological selection of Britannicas, Encyclopedia Britannicas to cross-reference, and you're going to get different viewpoints from different people that are going to give you slightly different time frames. And that's why you get the different types of stories. And some of them are clearly wrong, but Herodotus always footnotes and tells you who the source is and lets you decide. And he frequently will give you multiple accounts and versions of the same event. And I'll give you one example because it's very interesting, and that's the kidnapping of Helen of Troy. At the start of the Histories, he starts it off very early on with this incident, this event that he says sparks the war, provides that spark of anger and animosity that then further leads to these bigger conflicts. And that is when Alexander steals Helen from Menelaus out of Mycenae, Sparta, back in like 550 BC, roughly 100 years prior to the events of the Persian Wars. Now, I say Alexander, we here would know him more commonly as Paris. Herodotus refers to him as Alexander. He also refers to the city of Troy, not as Troy, but as Ilion. Troy had numerous names in the ancient world. It was known as Troy, it was known as Troia, it was known as Ilion, it was known as Ilios, and it was known as Ilium, but they all mean Troy. And in one version of the events, Alexander steals Helen, he kidnaps her, he steals a large amount of wealth from Menelaus as well, and then he flees back to Troy. And then we know the events from there. The Greeks all rally, they sail their fleet over there to Troy, and they sack the city and they get Helen back. But the Egyptians told Herodotus a second story, a very different story, a very interesting story. In the Egyptian stories, the Egyptian priests told Herodotus that Alexander, in fact, did not sail back to Troy. Instead, he sailed to Egypt. And in Egypt, he was detained by the authorities who wanted to know the source of the wealth that was on his ships and how he came to be in possession of the wife of the king of Sparta. They find out that, in fact, that Helen was kidnapped, and at this point, they keep Helen, they keep the treasures off of his ship, and they kick Alexander out of the country. They give him free passage, but tell him if he ever returns, he'll be killed. And at that point, Alexander, aka Paris, returns to Troy. The Greeks arrive, and the Greeks ask Priam to give up Helen. And Priam tells the Greeks that he can't give up Helen because she's not there. The Greeks refuse to believe Priam. They sack the city, and then with the few remaining survivors that are left alive, they again put to them, "Where is Helen of Troy?" Whereupon the survivors tell the Greeks once again, "Helen's not here." At this point, with the city burned to the ground, the Greeks actually believe the Trojans that they don't have Helen, that she is in fact not there, and that they learn that she is in Egypt, and then they sail to Egypt and they recover her in Egypt. What a fantastic story if that version of events is actually true. And Herodotus believed that that version of events was the true version of events. And the reason that he believed it was true is because he said, had Helen been in Troy and the Greeks had asked Priam with their host, their giant battle host arranged around the city, that Priam certainly, absolutely would have given up Helen to the Greeks in order to avoid the complete destruction of his city. And the fact that he didn't give her up was because she wasn't there, because had she been there, he would have absolutely turned her over without a moment's hesitation. And it does tend to make sense. It makes sense if you think that this was an actual story, that it actually occurred, and there is considerable archaeological evidence that Troy was burned at this time. So what a fantastic and tragic twist that would make to the tale of Troy and the tale of the Iliad on this version here that Herodotus gives you within the Histories. And it's fantastic. It's fantastic stuff. And for that reason and the other reasons that I've outlined, I do believe that Herodotus is in fact the father of history, one of the most important authors in the history of the Western civilization. And he is in fact is not the father of lies. So that's the story. What about the versions of this book? If you want to go out and you want to read a copy of this book, You've got this one right here, the Viking Press edition from 2013. This is a library edition. Before anybody goes out and spends any of their own hard-earned cash, please, 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 if you have not read Herodotus before, if you're not familiar with his works, do yourself a favor, check out a book from your local library, sample the pages, see if this is something that you like before you spend your hard-earned cash. And then if you do like it, then you can come back and consider what I have to say about the various productions. Now, there are numerous editions and publications of the Histories by Herodotus. This is one of the more recent from 2013, and it is a translation by Tom Holland, a fairly recent translation by Tom Holland. And it's a rather controversial translation by Tom Holland. And the reason it's controversial is because Tom Holland updates the original translation, which was done by George Rawlinson back in the 1800s, and he gives it a far more contemporary wording and dialogue. He uses more contemporary language for Herodotus to relate the stories, to make it an easier read for a modern reader. And I hate it. Some people like it. I did not like it at all. I thought it was rather jarring. I prefer that old speech. I prefer that old Oxford-like language interpretation that you get from George Rawlinson that he did in the 1800s. I think using those older, more antiquated words and that antiquated style of English speaking, that it fits and feels more like the speaking and dialogue of a person who lived 2,500 years ago. And it puts you more into that mindset that you're reading an ancient text. And I really did not care for the contemporary text in here, although some people do. Some people do actually like this contemporary text quite a bit. Speaking of books, this is a library book because I lost my reading copy of the Histories somewhere back in the mists of time. I don't know where it disappeared to. It's been gone for a while. And I don't have my reading copy, which is just a plain Jane version of the Rawlinson translations. But I do have my fancy pants version of Herodotus and the Histories. And I'm going to get my workout here for the day. It's contained here in this 4-volume set, the George Rawlinson translation of the London Press from 1858, at least volume 1, collecting Herodotus, the Histories, with many letters and discourses and analysis interjected into here to round out this 4-volume set and make it a 4-volume set of Herodotus, the Histories. And this is George Rawlinson's translation. George Rawlinson was a British historian and theologian who lived in the 1800s. And his first text here is translated in this book, volume 1, in 1858. This is a cloth-bound edition. Here's the title page. And it's filled with maps and other types of diagrams outlining events and showing you various different types of arms and armor that occurred there within the Persian Wars. And it is a very nice edition, but it's not very readable, and it's very fragile. You can see this is peeling off up here. This book is from 1858. It is coming up on 175 years of age. And I bought that set in a used bookstore when I was in my mid to late 20s, and I think I paid like $20 for it. If you go out onto the internet and you try to find this 4-volume set, they're hard to find. There's very few of them that are for sale, but each time I found one for sale, the prices on just these individual books, let alone the 4-volume set, are astronomical. My jaw drops open when I see the prices on these books. I don't know if they had mispriced it there at the used bookstore when I went and got it. I certainly could never come anywhere near affording what these things are asking for on the internet these days. Now, whether they sell for that amount of money, I have no idea, but they're just absolutely astronomical. There is another version of this book, another edition of it, that I think would probably be an excellent edition, and that is the landmark edition of Herodotus and the Histories with a translation by Andrea Purvis. And I think that might be a very good selection if you're looking to get a nice fancy pants version. That one has a lot of maps. Whatever version of Herodotus and the Histories that you look at picking up, I strongly recommend that you make sure that it has maps, that it has copious amounts of maps, and that those maps are interspersed throughout the book where appropriate, so that as you're reading about that section of the ancient world, you have the map that correlates to it right there in order for you to look back and reference it. because the names of these countries, the names of these cities do not correspond to anything on a current map of the world. They don't exist anymore. So you're going to be very confused unless you have that map in order to reference it, which is another thing that this book here does that I don't care for. It has maps, but it sticks all the maps at the back of the book. So as you're reading through, if you have a question about something, you have to flip all the way to the back of the book, find the map that you want, and then flip back to where you were reading and continue on. And I think that's a little bit of a pain in the butt. But that's it. That's Herodotus, the Histories. That's why I think that he is, in fact, the father of history and not the father of lies. And there are fantastic versions of this book that are out there. If you've got opinions on Herodotus and the Histories, put it down in the comments section below. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. One last thing before we go. If you're interested in learning more about that landmark press edition of Herodotus and the Histories, Michael K. Vaughan did a fantastic video on that specific edition, and I will link Michael K. Vaughan's edition down in the description below. Highly encourage you to go over and check out his video on the landmark edition of Herodotus and the Histories. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.